Gale Warning. A strong wind had been blowing all day, and at night it grew worse still. The next morning, the Fat Controller was eating toast and marmalade for breakfast when his wife came in. "Oh, Topham dear," she sighed. "There's been slates blown off the roof of the house in the night." "I'll get someone to replace them, my dear," he promised. "No use until this gale has died down, though. They'll blow off as fast as they're put on." At the shed, the engines had been teasing James. They were remembering the time he had been spun around and around on the turntable and had to wait for the wind to drop before he could be rescued. "Be careful, James," chuckled Henry. "Mind you don't go on any turntables today." James was indignant. "Careful yourself, Henry. Make sure you don't stick in a tunnel when you need to take shelter." Henry didn't care a bit, and the engines laughed as they went to collect their trains at the station. Henry's first stop was at the station before the viaduct. "Be careful, Henry," the station master warned him. "The wind on the viaduct is very fierce today." But Henry was lucky. The wind dropped for a few moments at just the right time, and he brought his train safely over. The station beyond was in an exposed place too. Henry knew this, but was so pleased at crossing the viaduct that he forgot. "Fancy worrying about a bit of wind," he said to himself. "Now I've got no more stops until the workstation. That's one of the buffers for silly little James." As he rattled through the station, he saw something that made him whistle shrilly in horror. A few hundred yards in front, a tree was suddenly uprooted by the gale and crashed across the line. "Ugh!" groaned Henry, and his driver slammed the brakes on hard. Henry skidded along the rails, coming closer and closer to the tree. He shut his eyes and waited for the impact. Nothing happened. Henry slowly opened his eyes and looked again, to find he had stopped inches from the tree. "Phew!" he thought, and let off steam with relief as the guard came running to see what was the matter. Henry pushed the coaches back to the station, and when the passengers found out what had happened, they came to thank Henry for preventing a nasty accident. "Well done, Henry," said James when he found out. "Perhaps it's useful to be able to stick when you need to after all." Thomas and the Tickles. "Brrr! It's very cold and frosty tonight, Thomas," said his driver, as he climbed out of the cab and got ready to go home. "I can't wait to get home to a warm fireside and a nice cup of hot cocoa." After he'd gone, Thomas was settling down for the night when he suddenly felt something moving about inside his coal bunker. "Whatever is that?" he wondered. It tickled terribly. Then he felt it move from his coal bunker to his cab. "Is anyone out there?" he called out, but the tickle didn't say anything. Thomas waited to see what the tickle would do next. There was a long pause. Then suddenly, "Tickle, tickle, tickle," came on the top of his cab. Next, there was a very faint mew and a little scratching sound. "It sounds like a kitten. But it can't be, surely." By now, Thomas could feel 2 tickles inside his cab. Then the first tickle left the second tickle near his fire, and he felt it tickling its way out of his cab again. This happened 5 more times. There were 3 tickles, then 4 tickles, then 5, 6, 7 tickles. All of a sudden, the tickles stopped, and all Thomas could hear was a sort of purring sound, a bit like the one Bertie the bus makes when he's stopped at the traffic lights as his engine is ticking over. Thomas thought that it all sounded very mysterious. He rather liked the feeling of the tickles, but he wished he could find out what they were. Gradually he drifted off to sleep, and it wasn't until the next morning that the mystery was solved. When Thomas's driver and fireman came, they were very surprised to discover a mother cat with 6 kittens, all sleeping soundly by the coal shovel. "She must have brought them in to keep warm by your fire last night, Thomas," said his driver. "It would have given off quite a heat for several hours." The Fat Controller soon found homes for all the kittens. There were 5 girl kittens that they called Annie, Clarabelle, Daisy, Mavis, and Henrietta, and 1 boy kitten. Can you guess what they called him? It's the same name as someone who is number one. Harold and the Landslide. When it rained, the other engines sometimes teased Duck. "This sort of weather ought to suit you," they said, and Duck would laugh with them. But he really didn't like rain any more than they did, and now and then he was tempted to hide in a tunnel on his branch line and wait until the rain had stopped. Then he remembered what had happened to Henry many years before, and knew that it would be silly. Besides, he always had passengers who wanted to reach their destinations and would be cross if they didn't, not to mention the Fat Controller. One autumn the rain seemed to go on forever. Day after day it poured, great pools of water spread over the fields, and all the rivers and streams were full to overflowing. Few passengers ventured out unless they had to, so Duck was surprised one morning when a party of young men, carrying packs on their backs, travelled from Tidmouth to Alsborough. "Hikers," explained Duck's driver, "probably on holiday, so they don't want to waste their time, even if it's raining." By the time Duck had set off for Tidmouth again, it seemed to be raining harder than ever. They had not gone far when Duck noticed the rails didn't seem to be there anymore. His driver noticed too. Luckily, because the rain made it difficult to see properly, they were not going too fast and could stop easily. As they watched, part of the embankment slivered sideways, and more rails disappeared. "Back, Duck, back!" urged the driver. Duck didn't need telling twice. When they were on more solid ground, they stopped again, and the guard ran to the nearest signal box to explain what had happened. Then they got permission to return to the station. A little later, the station master came running onto the platform. "Emergency," he told them. "One of those hikers has been caught in a landslide on the cliffs and needs the hospital. But the road is out as well as the railway, and it will take ages for an ambulance to come the long way round." "Sounds like a job for Harold," remarked Duck. The station master stared. "Of course," he said. "Well done, Duck. It's a good job you haven't let the rain send your brain rusty." He ran off to telephone the airfield. "Ah," said Harold when he heard the news. "But we can't leave the poor chap there for even more landslides to fall on him, can we?" Quickly he was into the air and away, and though the wind was against him, it wasn't long before they reached the place. The hikers had been walking along a cliff path. Part of it had collapsed and slipped down the cliffside, taking one of the hikers with it. Luckily, a ledge lower down had prevented him from going too far, but the fall had broken one of his arms, and in any case, the cliff was too steep for him to have climbed back up. Harold hovered anxiously a few feet above the injured man, and as close to the cliff as he dared. He was very careful, because near cliffs there can be a sudden wind which might blow an unwary helicopter into trouble. Harold could feel the winds becoming stronger. Very cautiously, a rescue officer was winched down on a strong cable. The injured hiker was helped onto a special stretcher, and when he had been securely strapped to it, he was pulled up into Harold. Then the cable was let down again, so that the rescue officer could be pulled up too. When he was safely inside, Harold breathed a sigh of relief. "Phew," he said. "Thank goodness that's done. Quick, let's get away from these cliffs before the wind blows any harder." But once above the cliff, the wind helped, and before long they were hovering above the hospital at Wellsworth. They landed gently on the lawn near the car park, and the hiker was taken into safe hands to have his arm put in a plaster. "Well done, Harold," said the doctor. "Our young friend's accident has spoilt his holiday, but thanks to you, he'll soon be—" He broke off and glanced up at the sky. "As right as rain, I suppose." As for Duck, he had a holiday too. He was stuck at Arsdale for a week while the line was repaired. The passengers had a long journey by bus, but poor Duck couldn't go anywhere. He says he doesn't want another holiday. They're too boring. First prize. Trevor the traction engine was dozing in the vicarage orchard, enjoying the late summer sunshine. His driver arrived with a bucket, cloth and polish. "There is a steam engine rally at the village agricultural show, and I think that you will win the best kept engine competition," he said. When his driver had finished cleaning, Trevor looked splendid, with all his brass glistening in the sunshine. Edward arrived on the line that runs past the bottom of the orchard. "My word, Trevor," Edward commented. "Don't you look marvellous? I'm sure you'll win a prize at the show." Edward was on his way to the station to pick up a trailer full of tables for the fruit and vegetable competitions at the show. He also had to take a trailer containing 2 special passengers. 2 of the farmer's donkeys were going to give rides to the children. "Good luck, Trevor," called Edward as he set off for the station. Not long afterwards, the vicar came running down the orchard to where Trevor and his driver was getting ready for the show. "We need your help, Trevor. Edward has broken down and cannot get to the station to pick up the tables and donkey show," the vicar explained. Trevor chuffed off to the station yard, where he was hooked up to a trailer full of tables. He set off down a narrow, muddy lane that led to the showground to deliver the tables. Trevor then went back to the station yard for the donkeys. But the donkeys did not want to get into the trailer. "Hurry up," pleaded Trevor. "I'll miss the competition if you carry on being so stubborn." Trevor's driver had an idea and hurried off to find some carrots. "These will do the trick," he said, and put the carrots in the trailer. The donkeys saw the carrots and jumped into the trailer straight away. Trevor set off down the muddy lane again and soon reached the showground. He caught sight of his reflection in the water as he passed the boating lake and was horrified. "Oh goodness, I'm covered in mud. I can't enter the competition now," he cried. "Never mind," said his driver. "We can help the donkeys give rides to the children instead." And that's exactly what they did. The next day, back in the orchard, the vicar came to see Trevor and tied a big red rosette with a first in the centre onto his funnel. "This is from the children, who think that you are the very best traction engine ever." Trevor was delighted and wore his rosette all day. James's traffic jam. One morning, as James was waiting to leave the big station, the Fat Controller came to see him. "I hope that you can give us a good run this morning, James," he said. "I have an important meeting to go to, and don't want to be late. Do your best, won't you?" "Of course, sir," replied James. "We'll have you there in no time." "Well done," laughed the Fat Controller. "I know I can rely on you." On every passenger train, there is something called an emergency cord. If there is an emergency, it can be used to call the guard, and it automatically stops the train at the same time. But it must only be used in an emergency, otherwise the person who pulled it may have to pay a fine. On James's train today, there was a party of foreign holidaymakers. They could not understand English very well, and thought the chain above the door was calling for the buffet car attendant. So they pulled it. Suddenly, the brakes came on hard, and James had to stop as quickly as he could. "Oh no," he groaned as he came to a standstill. "Now what?" "Emergency, James," said his driver, looking back. "Someone has pulled the cord." The guard walked along the train to find out what was wrong. The foreign visitors were pleased to see him, but the guard was not pleased when they asked for 4 cups of coffee. The matter was soon cleared up, and the guard told James he could go. But when he tried to start, he found that he couldn't. The sudden action of the brakes had locked them solid, and James couldn't move an inch. What was worse, the train had stopped right across a level crossing, and by now there were long queues of cars on both sides, waiting to get over the railway. James was overcome with embarrassment, but he couldn't do a thing about it. The Fat Controller came and the motorists all told him what a nuisance the railway was. "I'm sorry, sir," said James sadly. "Not your fault, James," he replied, "but I don't know how I'm going to reach my meeting." James didn't either. Then a flash of colour in the traffic queue caught his eye. "Isn't that Bertie waiting?" he said. "Maybe he could turn around and—" In a flash, James's fireman was running down the road. A few minutes later, he came back grinning broadly. "No problem, sir," he said to the Fat Controller. "He's trying to reach the same place as you. He says he'll be happy to take you when he has turned." It was another hour before a fitter came to mend his brakes, and longer still before James could get his train moving. He was very sorry, and so were the foreign visitors, but they promised not to make the same mistake again. James felt certain that they wouldn't. The really useful traction engine. "We have some very important visitors coming to the railway," the Fat Controller told the engines one morning. "A group of school children on the mainland have won a prize for their work on steam railways, and their special prize is to come and meet all of you." The engines were flattered. They thought it a great honour, and wanted to make the children's visit extra special. "What do you think the children will enjoy doing?" asked the Fat Controller. "I could take them for a picnic on my branch line," suggested Thomas. "Why don't we give them a fast spin on the turntable at the big station?" said Gordon. "If the men spin the handle fast enough, it'll be like a fairground ride." "Oh, they could wait for a big gust of wind to spin it around instead," laughed Henry, looking at James, who gave him a look. "I could do tricks with the tracks," put in Percy. "If I stop 'em quickly and they bump and bang into each other, it'll be just like the Dodgem cars." They could wash and polish my paintwork," said James. "I'm sure they'll love that," the Fat Controller said dryly. "But what can we do that would be an extra special treat for them?" Edward thought hard, and then he knew exactly who would love to see the children during their visit. "I could take him to see Trevor the traction engine at the Vicarage Orchard. He loves children, and it will make a nice change from sawing wood or doing odd jobs around the orchard." "That's a splendid idea, Edward. I'll arrange it at once." Trevor was glad to help. Jem Cole and the vicar bolted a long wooden seat to Trevor's bunker so that he could carry a few children at once. He couldn't wait to see them. When the day came, the engines gave the children a lovely day. They loved their ride on the branch line, and as a special surprise for the picnic, the Fat Controller sent a big cake in the shape of an engine. They squealed with laughter when Gordon took them for a fast spin on the turntable. He was glad it was over. He had spun so much that he felt dizzy when he finally lurched off and back to the shed. They clapped and cheered when Percy bumped and banged the trucks around, and James was impressed with how well they managed to polish his smart red paint until it glistened in the sun. But Trevor was the happiest of all, chuffering around the yard, giving children rides all day until it was time for them to go home again. The children thanked all of the engines and the Fat Controller for a wonderful time. "What did you like best?" asked the Fat Controller. Gordon was sure his spins on the turntable had given the children a thrill. Thomas was certain the picnic had been the highlight of the day. Percy thought his bumping and bashing would have been their favourite, but the children all agreed. The rides on Trevor were the best of all. "He's such a kind traction engine," they told him kindly. Trevor couldn't believe it. He was pleased. "You know, some people say I'm old-fashioned, but there's nothing wrong with that, is there?" "Of course not," chortled Edward. "They say I'm old-fashioned too, but everyone knows I'm a really useful engine, and so are you. Trevor, the really useful traction engine." Skarloey gets a scare. Skarloey is a little old engine with a tall black funnel and a cheeky smile. He works with his friend Rheneas on the little railway that takes passengers up into the high hills of Sodor to see the lakes and waterfalls. He is always eager to work and help his forgetful driver. Skarloey remembers a time when he arrived at a station with cleaning brushes leaning against his boiler because his driver had forgotten to remove them. He even left 2 socks to dry and on Skarloey's buffers once, and the poor old engine was teased by the others. "Look at his buffer mitts," scoffed Sir Handel. When it was Skarloey's turn to take the passengers to the vicarage fete, he arrived rather late. Skarloey felt impatient. He was steamed up and ready to go, but his driver made him wait. He had lost his tea mug and was looking everywhere for it. "Oh, never mind, Skarloey," he said at last. "We mustn't be late." When they arrived at the vicarage, Skarloey felt hot and bothered because he had rushed to make up time, and his driver felt parched because he had no tea. Skarloey looked forward to lunchtime when he could sit in a siding and let off steam. But things got worse. His driver's sandwiches went missing. "I put them up there," he said to the guard, pointing toward the cab. Skarloey groaned with dismay. Skarloey was tired when he returned to the yard that night. He was ready for a good night's rest in the shed, but the driver had forgotten something else. "Where's my torch?" he sighed. "Never mind that now," Skarloey grumbled. "Just open the shed, drop my fire, and let me go to sleep." Skarloey rolled into the shed and quickly fell asleep after the driver and fireman left for home. But he wasn't asleep for long. He woke up with a start to hear loud rustling noises beneath him. He couldn't call to anyone because he had no steam, so he shut his eyes tight and waited for morning. When his driver and fireman arrived to start work, he told them all about it. "With all these noises and all my belongings going missing, I'm starting to think something's wrong," said the driver. "I'm going to speak to the station master." The station master confirmed that none of the driver's belongings had been handed into the lost property office. But he did advise the driver that there had been reports of a burglary at Crovan's Gate, so everyone had to be vigilant. "I'll ask a policeman to pop round later," said the station master. That evening, as Skarloey was taking on water from the water tower, PC Penston arrived with his notebook. "I'll keep an eye on your shed tonight," he told Skarloey's driver. "We'll soon solve this mystery." Skarloey was shut up in the shed again, but he felt safer with PC Penston around. But no sooner had everything gone still than the rustling sounds began again. Skarloey felt scared. The next morning, he told PC Penston what he had heard. "There was no sign of anyone coming in or out," he told Skarloey, "but we'll take a look all the same." PC Penston and his driver investigated the engine shed. They didn't find a thief, but they did discover a tea mug in a toolbox. "Ho-ho! I put it there while I mended Skarloey's footplate," the driver laughed. They soon found the torch beside the telephone. "That's right, I needed to see the phone book at night," he recalled. And a trail of sandwich crumbs, which they followed to a pile of leaves and shreds in the corner of the shed. Underneath was a sleeping hedgehog, her babies, and the remains of the driver's sandwich. "Oh dear," laughed the driver. "I put my sandwiches on the floor while I spoke to the fireman yesterday." He bent down and smiled at the little hedgehog family. "You're quite welcome to them." Skarloey didn't mind sharing his shed with a hedgehog and wasn't afraid anymore. It wasn't long before the Fat Controller arrived with a locker for Skarloey's driver to keep his belongings safe, and a saucer of milk for Skarloey's hedgehog. The good old days. Duke is one of the oldest engines on the narrow gauge railway. He's kind-hearted and wise, and likes to help the younger engines by giving them advice and keeping them in order. One day, Thomas was helping out at the main line and stopped at the junction to talk to Duke. The old engine would often tell Thomas stories about what the railway used to be like, back in the days when he was a young engine. Duke often referred to these as the good old days. As they were chatting, Gordon rushed past with the express. Thomas called cheekily to him, "Beep beep, hello fat face." "Really, Thomas, You shouldn't talk to a senior engine like that. In my day, the younger engines weren't as cheeky as you are now. They knew their place and worked hard. We didn't have time for fun and mischief, not like you youngsters today. There were rules for everything and we had to obey them. We had to work together and help one another. And we had to do just as we were told. Otherwise, they'd have been trouble. Oh, said Thomas. I don't like the sound of that. It sounds like the bad old days to me. It's better now without so many rules. I do work very hard, Duke. I'm never late, but I do like to have some fun too. You can have some fun without being cheeky, Duke scolded. I'm having fun on Sunday when I take the special picnic train up to the lake. The summer visitors love it, and I know all the best places for picnics. Phew, Thomas chuckled. It's a tough run up to that lake, Duke. I've heard it's uphill all the way. Will you manage it? Of course I will. I may be old, young Thomas, but I've still got plenty of steam left in my boiler. I can still show you younger engines a thing or two about pulling trains. But on Sunday afternoon, when Thomas was taking trucks to the works, he was surprised to find Duke in the repair shed looking sad. It's my old valves, Thomas. They're leaking and steam is escaping. Don't worry, Duke. The men will mend you, and you'll be as good as new in no time. But not in time to pull the picnic train tomorrow, Duke said sadly. He didn't want to let the visitors down. Can't one of the other engines take it for you? Asked Thomas. I can't just let any engine pull my train, Thomas. The picnic train is special. What about Rheneas? He'd look after the passengers well. He's a good engine, but Rheneas is prone to breaking down. The Thing controller suggested Duncan, but he's already got too much work. What about Sir Handel? He learned a lot from you when he worked with you on your old line. But he can be bad-tempered and impatient, Thomas. It would never suit his grace if he upset my friends on the picnic train. Thomas fought hard, and there in the yard was the very engine. Peter Sam could do it, Thomas suggested gleefully. I know he teases you about being old, but he's friendly and a hard-working engine who looks up to you. Peter Sam was flattered. Of course I'll run the picnic train for you, Grandpuff. Peter Sam was as good as his word, and enjoyed pulling the picnic train up to the lake. Duke told him all the best places to take the visitors, and they had a splendid time. And when he got back that evening, Duke was waiting with brand new valves and feeling as good as new. Thank you both for your help, he said proudly. You two young engines have shown how we should all work together and help each other. It's just like the good old days.